Today's collectible spot, we are having a look at the Chronicle Collectibles Chronicle Legacy Series Tippett Studios RoboCop ED-209. This is Spot's second look at another collectible from the folks over at Chronicle Collectibles, this time spotlighting the ED-209, the main baddie from the original RoboCop 1. Yes, there's technically Dick Jones, but of course the one thing a lot of people will remember from the original RoboCop is his battle with the ED-209. Chronicle Collectibles reproduces this spectacular sculpture, this spectacular collectible from the original. This was molded from the original masters and the actual puppet used on screen in the film. Probably one thing as well that's been omitted from this review is the box itself. I simply could not fit it on camera. So we're basically going to jump right to the collectible itself and forego the box art. But the box is, let me tell you, quite large indeed. Now, the statue itself weighs 21 pounds, so it's a little bit heavier than some other statues that you might have in your collection. Its dimensions are 26 by 19 by 16, and also includes a detailed OCP logo base, which I'll show you in a second, as I've already taken the time to put him together, but I'll disassemble the ED-209 so you can kind of see how he comes out of box, and then we're going to reassemble him from there. What you do, though, get with the ED-209, much like the Kane RoboCop 2 statue we've already had a look at, is you get a Chronicle Collectibles Certificate of Authenticity with also the signature of the original sculptor. It says ED-209 is a prototype urban assault combat warrior produced by OCP. ED-209's first appearance in Mega Corporation's boardroom, where a malfunction causes it to unfortunately and violently kill a board member. It's the seminal event that shifts OCP's strategy to produce an experimental cyborg design, or RoboCop. According to Phil Tippett, the theory behind ED-209 was that he built it to be a terrible, formidable entity, but poorly designed to not really up to the task which was created. He's a symbol of hubris, of design and industry, and a fascist pride. He is meant to be somewhat comical in its ineptitude for good reason. Down below as well, again, you've got the signature, you've got Chronicle Legacy Series and Tippett Studios stamp and Chronicle down below. Included as well, you get a couple of original design images of what the ED-209 could have originally looked like. There's the back end of it. There's the top, also scaled to, I guess, what the size of the person would be next to it. It obviously gets a much larger scale after that. As well, we have the initial boardroom introduction of ED-209 description. Kinney falls back over model. City ED-209 continues to fire. Sequence shot BR-18, plate number 54DD-1. And a more sketched image of that same scene. And the scene finally with ED-209 confronting RoboCop near the end of the movie. The core components, when you get ED-209 out of the box, consist of the bottom legs, the display stand, and then the top cockpit or top body of ED-209. But before we do anything else, let's have a look at the display stand, and then we'll kind of add the components of ED-209 on top of that. The stand itself, which would likely make up the majority of the weight that this statue is, sitting at, again, 21 pounds. The top of the stand, much also larger than the RoboCop 2 Kane. I'll show you that in a second. But on the top, you've got OCP in a graded floor grate style of stand. Then on the front of that, you've got RoboCop ED-209 and the signature of original sculptor Phil Tippett. Tipping the statue upside down, you've also got ED-209 Robot, RoboCop, Tippett Studio, Chronicle Legacy Series, as well as the trademark down below 1987 Orion Pictures. It is also to note as well that the material that they used for the underside of the stand is a softer, not quite felt, but a softer, spongier rubber, so it's going to not scratch any surface when you put the display stand down. So we're going to assemble this guy, but like we did with the RoboCop 2 Kane, I want to show the individual components because they are super detailed. Factoring in as well that this is taken from the original puppet model used from the movie, it is as accurate as you're going to get with a reproduction. The side here, you've got like little markings here. It says Max Psi Radial ED-209 3798CRSL-R20. It says do not open fuel cell extreme intake hazard. You can see all the wires also on the back side where the individual feet or toes will be able to move. Obviously, none of the statue itself does move. Well, that's not true. There is one part that does move on the statue. And again, I'll show you that in a second. Now, what's neat about the statue itself is that they could have gone with a straight standing ED-209. In other words, where both feet are completely planted to the display stand included. But what they opted to do instead, which I appreciate much more, is that they had this stance of ED-209 where the forward leg is again lunging forward, and then the back leg it's only the front foot that technically is going to be touching the display stand. The back of the foot, however, has the foot or toes in a somewhat situating in a position where it's about to land or it's gauging the flooring underneath it. All these individual green wires and red wires, they are separate pieces too as well. They're not simply just sculpted in. I really like that a lot. The coloring is primarily a gray, but there's a lot of this extra wash that they've added to the little piston areas. The area here where the leg would slide back and forth is also a slightly different color than the rest of the main leg component. So what we're going to do first is we're going to take the posts, these little post pillars, these little notches here, and we're going to line it up to the display stand. Now you may not be able to see it, but there's a hole right there, and then there's a hole right there. You're going to be lining one up, and I find the best one to do is actually line up the front hole first and then attach the second one to that. Now if I just spin the stand around here, again, it's only really going to be this toe here that's attaching itself to the display stand. Everything else, the other two toes on the sides and the one at the back, is actually not going to be touching the stand. Let me show you what I mean. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of what I'm talking about. The front foot is completely flat against this display stand, while the other foot, on the other hand, it's only the front that's actually planted itself onto the actual flooring. These side feet, as well as this one here, is completely floating. You can see how I can, well, somewhat run my fingers underneath it. You can see it does not touch the floor of the stand at all. Now before we go ahead and attach the top part of ED-209 by the singular plug on the underside, again we'll have a look at the main top torso or main component, the actual main area of ED-209, and it is quite spectacular. What I was mentioning before, there being no moving pieces, technically that's not correct. There are hinges on the sides that can flap up and down. It really doesn't serve too much purpose, but there is some posability to speak of in that section there. The rest of the ED-209 here is simply stunning. Imagining holding this in hand and knowing that it's based on the original model that they used for the movie. So it is pretty much, again, about 100% accurate to how it would have appeared in the movie. The side, you can see the missiles here that he does use during the fight with RoboCop. The Gatling turrets on the front there as well. Two on the one side, and then, well, one on the one side with the undercarriage there under section of the gun, and then two on the other side here. The front of ED-209, and I actually, surprisingly, if you can believe this, of some of the robots featured in movies, ED-209 is one of the more scarier ones for me, certainly growing up and watching the original RoboCop. Something about this face, and it's not quite a face, understanding so, but the absence of a face, just this dome, and then this mouth right here, it just really was scary to me, especially having ED-209 growling while he was talking. Now initially, from watching documentaries, this section right here at one point was going to be inverted, but they opted instead then to have it going the opposite way, which I think makes more sense had they keeping it this way than having it inverted. You can see the inside there has some additional wires. And it looks like there's a venting system as well, or perhaps just simply where his speaker will be coming out of. There's just a singular pin right here. Not really certain what would be the reason for that, but that's featured on the front there as well. Again, some red and black wires woven and attached to the insides of, I'm going to say, ED-209's mouth, but I'm just going to go with that for the rest of this review. There's the underside of ED-209. Most of this is going to be occupied by where, well, being that this is just going to be the area where the legs are going to attach to, but there are a few little metal wires there on the insides and a couple of hoses. And we've got some wires there on the back side there as well. And there's little like labels and stuff like that all over the place here. At the top there as well. All these little bolts where you could imagine that ED-209 would have been assembled. The bolts just attaching the flaps and stuff together. I suppose he does have a somewhat primitive design to him, but a very effective means in the sense that you basically just direct ED-209 to whatever target that you had, and ED-209 would just continue to fire and walk towards him. Just, you know, of course, getting to a stairs, then you see ED-209's more limited capabilities. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to attach the plug. Now there's a hole actually at the top of ED-209's legs. You can't simply just put it on frontward. It actually sits on an angle. It's similar in the same way that Kane's torso didn't actually sit front. It sat slightly rotated. So we want to line it up. And actually I think, let me just double check here. Yes, with lining up everything, we're going to fit the slotted notch. This is again a little more difficult because I'm doing this looking through the viewfinder here. We're just going to fit this into place. With the statue finished, you can see how the top turret area of ED-209 faces the one side. It doesn't face forward, so if you prefer to have ED-209 facing frontward, of course you're going to want to spin the stand ever so slightly. Here's the statue slightly again rotated forward so you can see the front end view of ED-209. Now the gun turrets do move in the movie up and down. This is kind of more of a posed down positioning. But again, I love how it's got a lunging forward presence. It gives it just a more imposing look to it rather than having it simply standing straight, simply having the gun turret standing forward and looking right at you. It looks like it has a little bit more flow to it. Let's do a couple more rotations and you can see what I mean. Here's a side view of the statue. Again, you can see how the one leg moving forward than the other. I could almost see it pouncing and moving itself in with momentum towards RoboCop as the Gatling guns are firing off at him. Rotating the stand again, this is a slight back turn of what he will look like. And there's the back. Now you probably will want to see how ED-209 stacks up to the RoboCop 2 Kane that we've already had a look at. Here is Kane standing next to the ED-209. You can also see too what I'm talking about with the display stands. The stand for ED-209 is almost half a size bigger than the RoboCop 2 Kane on the right. Now if these are scaled accurately to one another, RoboCop 2 still stands taller than ED-209. They're roughly about the same width to one another. ED-209 is a little bit more solid in his construction in the sense that he's got more panels and everything is really finished in design. RoboCop 2 Kane, on the other hand, is made up of more intricate components. A little more of him is revealed, a little more of him is exposed, rather than, again, the more finished look of Ed on the side. Personally, one thing I would have loved to have seen in RoboCop 2 was maybe something where they could have tested RoboCop 2 Kane, or Kane, with an ED-209. Maybe they could have brought, I know the big reveal certainly would have been having RoboCop 2 emerging during the conference, but I think it would have been also very cool if they had put him out on the field to test him, and they maybe had paired him up against a couple of ED-209s. That would have been really cool to see him standing toe-to-toe with Ed over here. With both examples, though, you can clearly see why Chronicle Collectibles is fantastic at giving us reproductions of screen-used, especially screen-used puppets. Because with these being animatronic, the fact that they would have taken the original model source material and given us something like this, again, you're getting a very accurate representation of what the, in this case, ED-209 or Kane would have looked like in the movies. RoboCop 2 Kane and, of course, ED-209 here still remain to this day Spot's favorite robots featured in a movie. The sheer presence that they convey in the movie itself, in the case certainly of ED-209, is absolutely terrifying still to this day. Watching that opening scene, knowing what was going to happen, it still gives me chills watching ED-209 walking into the boardroom and indicating and uttering those famous words, "Please put down your weapon, you have 20 seconds to comply." And of course, we know how well that turned out. And then from that point onward, ED-209 for me remained a legendary, a iconic well, not RoboCop, but certainly iconic robot from sci-fi movies. If you guys are interested in picking this up for yourself, I'll put the link down below to Chronicle Collectibles. It's definitely worth picking up, I would say, if you want to get yourself a screen-accurate replica of the robot featured in the movie itself. Today's collectible spot, we were having a look at the Chronicle Collectibles. This was the Legacy series of Tippett Studios ED-209 replica statue. Stay tuned, guys. Spot's going to have more collectible spots heading your way. As always, thanks for watching. See you next time.